All right, so here we're going to show basically how to make a bouncing ball, how to deal with very simple rigs, and we'll also deal with the graph editor and very basic functions with the graph editor. So we're going to work with the ultimate ball and we're going to do work with ultimate tailed. So let's start with the ultimate ball and do a bounce. Just a bounce up and down. So remember when we're doing anything with a rig, we always want to reference it. If we don't reference it, the file will get a lot bigger and it can take up a lot of space. But the most important thing is that if we don't reference it, we can mess up the rig, and we want to keep that rig pristine so it can be changed, etc., etc. So let's go here, and we're going to go to create reference. So here we have a new file. We go to create reference, and I have an ultimate rigs, the ultimate ball, and I select reference. So here is our bouncing ball. So some things to remember about the bouncing ball is when we're animating it, we don't animate this root. This is called the root. The root is to stay stationary. So you may animate something and it may go very far away from the root, but it's still okay. You want to keep that root position. This may be different for other rigs because there's no absolute set way to rig a character or an object or anything like that. But the other thing about a root is that it will often hold information about the rig that you can change. So for instance, the rigger may add some extra details like version number, extra controls. So the extra controls are probably, I don't know, one of these things. I can turn it off. So I click on this thing and I turn it off, and it gets rid of the bouncy, the top control shapes. These are called control shapes. So when you have a rig, you only touch the control shapes, and that's usually what the rigger allows you to touch to make it simpler. We have visibilities, interesting. Okay, just showing the ball or the control shapes. Smoothing, I don't really know what that is. We're not going to deal with that too much. But then we also have ball type. We can go to simple with like no stripe or anything, checker, whatever, all these nifty little things, beach ball, etc. So you guys remember in class I showed you the squash and stretch in the 12 animation principles. So for this one, we're going to do squash and stretch. Now I'm moving the rig over here only so that I can, or the root, so that I can just move it out of the way, because we're going to have a couple other bouncing items here. So let's take this and put a little, like the basic stripe on it, and we're just going to make this thing bounce up into the air. So this will be 24 frames. So we'll start by clicking on the middle control shape, and then we'll move it up. So we may move it to, let's move it up, let's put it at 10. And so at 10, that's going to be where it starts. So I right click on the words translate Z, and I select key selected, because remember, you always have to key the starting position of an object. Then we're going to go, I'm going to move this down so that I can see a little closer what our keys are. You want to be able to get in there a little bit closer. And this is our range slider. This is our time slider where we do our basic animations, our basic keyframing. And so we have here a keyframe for translate Z. No, I didn't want to. Silly. So forget that. I didn't want a key Z. I wanted to key Y. Why didn't anybody tell me this? Okay, so we're at translate Y. And then we're going to go down to 12. And we're going to put this right on the ground. So another thing too about rigs is that everything is usually keyed, so all the defaults are set at 0, except for scale, which is usually going to be 1. So if I put a 0 in that, it's going to put it back to this floor position. I also have auto key on, so auto key can be very handy. Sometimes it works, most of the time it works. Sometimes it just doesn't want to seem to do anything. So it's kind of a good habit to keep auto key off when you're getting used to animation, so you really are explicit in telling where you want the animation to go. So we start over here and we go down there. If we move back and forth, this is called scrubbing. So what I want to do is I want to make it go back to this original position, and I right click on this keyframe, I select copy, I go to 24, I right click on that, and I press paste. So that makes it so that it goes back to the original spot. Now I can also, if I click on this, it's going to go down and come up, pause, down and come up. And it's pausing because the keyframe, the slider, goes from 1 to 35. So I can actually change that to 24. And now if I press play, it's going to loop. I'll show you how to loop that in another way in a second, which we learned from the solar system. Now if we look at our graph editor, and remember to keep your graph editor on your custom shelf. If you don't have it, hold down Control and Shift, go to Windows and Animation Editor, and click on Graph Editor, and you'll put it on your custom shelf. So we have the Graph Editor here, and here we can see our 3 keyframes, and you can also see these ease in, ease out. So we want this nice curve coming up at the top, but it doesn't look right when it goes down to the ground, obviously, so we have to fix that. Incidentally, if this is going super fast, remember to click on this little running dude down at the bottom right and make sure playback speed is set to 24 times 1. So in our graph editor, what we're going to want to change is we're going to want to click on this little guy down here, and then we're going to either click on linear tangents right up here or break tangents. The difference between these two, and it's a good thing to know, is that linear tangents, click on that, you'll get a nice, I don't know if it's a right angle or not, but you'll get a nice little thing here that breaks it so that it comes down. When the ball comes down, it's going to bounce. Go, bonk, just like that. Looks great. Yay, you're an animator. Or if you click on break tangents, like we move this around, notice how they're both connected. If we click break tangents, there's now a dotted line down here, and they both behave independently. So that's the difference. Sometimes you may want to break the tangents and get a little bit of a more rounded shape. So you don't want it to go too far because then it'll hover in the air and that'll look strange. So you want a nice little curve there. And this may help it to look a little bit more animated. And there we go. So now you can see it really hovers up here and it goes down very quickly down on the ground. If we look at it down here, we can see how it's really jumping. So if we want to add some a squash to it, since we have such few keyframes, probably the squash that we're going to want to have is going to be right around over here. So we'll go down here and let's see what we're going to do here. Let's bring it down pretty close, and we're going to key that Y, and we're going to go down to this one, and then we're going to click. Oh, remember, we need to key the first frame, so I almost keyed that one. If I keyed that at 12 without doing the squash, it would be perpetually squashed throughout the whole thing. So this is Y. We do it. We key it at Y. We go down to 12. And click on the top one, squash it, key that. However, doing this, it's going to start at a regular shape, but it's going to start squashing as soon as it, like all the way down. So that's not going to look right. Whoa, like that. Doesn't look good. So 11, we're going to want to zero out Y and key it. Now it's going to be pretty fast here. We can see it goes, but we have a very quick animation. So it goes down, squash, and then we want it to go up. So here we're going to change that again, but we could also give it a little squash or stretch going up and then key that. So when we get back to 24, we're also going to want to make sure that we're at 0, and then we key that. There you go. So it's pretty fast. Maybe it may look better if you do it a little bit longer. So to reiterate, what we've done here is we keyed the beginning for the top control shape and the middle control shape, and then just before it hits the ground, we key the original shape like this, and then we keyed it stretched, and then we also keyed it the squash. Instead of the regular shape, we keyed it as a stretch so that it has this effect of going back up, and as it's going up, it's going back into its regular position. So now say we want to actually repeat this, and like we did in the graph editor, in the solar system, we went into the graph editor. So let's look at the graph editor with the middle control shape. So with the middle control shape, we can also see that there's a little bit of a problem here. We can see that this has a strange little bump, and this might not necessarily be noticeable if you have so few keyframes, but if we had more keyframes, you would see a little bump before it goes up. It'd come down and it'd go back up. So this would fix it, and you can really only fix that if you do the break tangents. So that's what I just did to fix it. We can't really see it right here, but that's okay. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to make it repeat like we did with the solar system. So here you can see it just goes back up. If we play it here with it with the extender, it just stays up there. So we don't want to have to key over and over and over again unless there was a reason to. But what we'll do is we'll select the last keyframe. We'll go to curves. We'll go to post infinity, and we'll do cycle with offset. And now we can see that it's repeating. It's also showing us because we have infinity clicked. So if you don't see this, just make sure infinity is checked. And now it'll just keep repeating. But you'll notice a very interesting thing here. It only will squash and stretch on the first one. And the idea is, since I'm talking to myself, I will answer myself. So the reason is that it's only done post infinity on the middle control shape's last keyframe. So what we have to do is we have to do the top control shape and go back to our graph editor. And this is what the squash looks like. So I go to curves, I go to, I have to select it. Curves, post infinity, cycle with offset, and there we are, and infinity's on. I actually don't know if you need to click on the last keyframe. It may just be that you just need to select cycle with offset. So I could be wrong about that. Experiment for yourself. So now if we go here and I do this, we can see now that it continues to bounce. So there's our first little thing. I hope I went over that pretty well. And now we're going to look at, let's look at the bouncing ball along a path. So the bouncing ball along with a path is just a little bit more complicated, but not too much. You may think that you need to animate every single element of it, but what's neat about this and what's neat about 3D is that you let the graph editor and you let the program do a lot of the work, which is what we often do since there's so much tweening that the computer can do. So let's look at the graph here. If we have a regular pretty bouncy ball, it's going to bounce here, it's going to come up there, over there, etc. But notice that the line goes straight from down here all the way down there. If we have a ball that's a lot harder, like say a bowling ball, it's not going to want to bounce very much. And it's going to behave a little bit more in a different way. But let's presume a certain amount of bounciness to it. Also notice how close this arc is. So in this regard, we may have to go to do the breaking tangents. And we also want to have a nice curve up here, just like you can see a nice little curve over here. We don't want anything pointed. So, and you can see it's also very nice and rounded here. So what we'll do is we're going to reference in another ultimate ball. And let's also move this guy over here. And I only move that one to put it in a new position. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the regular bouncy ball. So I click on the middle control shape. I do Y as 10. Put it up there. Right click, key it, bring it down to 12. Put it at 0. Key that. Now let's go into our graph editor and let's see what we have here. Now, one of the only ways that Control-C works with Maya is in the graph editor. Don't try it in other places. You will get some pretty bad results that takes a while to fix up. Also, these three little viewports, buttons over here, are very handy. Fit selection in panels, frame playback range, and center the view around the current time. So what we'll do is we'll select these two. We'll go over here and there we go. I have a little helper over here. So we can add new parts to the animation. Now you could say, well, why aren't we going to do cycle with offset? Why aren't we going to... All right, and we're back. Sorry about that. So we have, we're going to keep this, going to keep repeating these guys. I think I might have said, why didn't we just use the cycle with offset? Partially because we want to repeat it only a number of times, and so we don't want it to repeat into infinity. So here we have our bouncing, and we want it to go straight from here down to there. So there's a couple ways you can do this. One is you could make a key that would be a reference, or you can just use a piece of paper and put it on your monitor, and that can show you exactly the angle that you want to go straight down. So I'll do that, and I'll bring it straight down. Whoops. My paper didn't hit that. Moving it along. There, that's about a good amount. May want to add another one down here. It's like really low for a tiny little bounce. You know, kind of curves it a little bit there, but it's all right. So let's look at this progress and see what it looks like now. So if we play it, oh, incidentally, also notice how this is a lighter color and this is a darker color gray. We see over here 82. This is where the time slider will end. So if I move this out of the way, you can see that the time slider in the bottom of the window is also changing. So this is another way to view or change the time slider. Let's go back to the beginning and press play. So that's pretty good. Obviously, we have some issues with it. Mainly that our bottom keys are they're not linear. So what we could do is we could change them. We could go to linear tangents. Now we'll get some more angled bounces. Oop, and go back to the beginning. Now it's bouncing. But something still looks a little strange, and mainly that's due to that these guys are all the same width. So let's go back to our image of the bouncing ball. Let me find it. Okay, so we see here that the distance between these guys keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So you don't want to adjust it too much so that it gets smaller too quickly. And I'm sure that there's a formula that you can figure it out. However, a lot of this I'm just strictly like eyeballing. You can also see that if you doubled that, it would be much longer. So, and I could calculate that, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to eyeball it. Okay, so we're looking at that. Let's move these guys in just a little bit. Now, I'm also going to move this out just a skosh. And you can also zoom in and out of this with the right mouse button. You can also grab on these guys, and if you hold down Shift first and then click and move in a direction, you're going to get, it will move in a constraint like this. So if I hold, if I select these guys, I hold down Shift and I click and move, it aims it in a particular axis. You'll also notice that there was a question mark, so it's saying which direction do you want to go in? I want to go in that one. And the same could also be if I clicked on this and then I moved it up, it would do the same thing, but I don't want to do that. So here is, I think, where I'm going to start bringing it in just a little bit. Bring it in just a little bit. Move that to the right. Bring this in a bit. Whoop. Move Still a little. It's up there. All right. So now we have something that's going to look a little bit more natural. And you want these bounces to be right in the middle, because if you don't put them in the middle, it's going to come up quicker, or it's going to go down quicker, and just going to, the going down and coming up is going to be at different speeds. So let's see what it looks like now. So it starts. So that's pretty good. All right. There is one point where it looks like it speeds up a little more than it should. That's pretty good. All right. So we have that. Now another thing that we can notice. Let's frame these guys. Is when I was talking about before with the breaking of the tangents. If we look at the top, we can see it's a pretty good arc over there. We could also widen the top of this if we broke the tangents. So say I go over here. I'm going to make this bigger. I'm going to break the tangents. And this way, I can make it just a little bit more rounded. And if you look at the bouncing ball here, you can see that the tangents are pretty close right over there, and they only start to get wider as you go down here. So I'm going to try to imitate that as much as I can. If we overdo it, watch what happens with the arc. Goes way up, and then that looks wrong. So we want to just have a nice rounded top. And I'll select all these guys over here and break the tangents. And you can see that the tangents, the arms turned into a dotted arm. That one could go in a little. You notice this last one, interestingly, is just straight like that. That's because I did a linear tangent on it by accident, and I want to change it back to a spline. So this is the spline over here, and that will round it. Also, notice that this keyframe has come up from the ground. These are the two numbers up here that that represent this key. The first number is the position in time, or the keyframe number, and then the second number is the value going up and down. So the second one, I put a 0 in, it goes back down to 0. Alright, now it's a lot more rounded. So let's go here, back to beginning, and let's watch it. So that looks a lot more realistic. Okay, so now we want to change the position going like forward. So I'm going to click on the root, just move it to a different spot, to start with, and I'm not animating it at all. And I click on our little middle control shape, and all I have to do to move it to a new position is consider the let's see, the z-axis. So we're gonna key the z-axis at the beginning, and this is where you have Maya do the work. And then I'm gonna go to 147, which is the end of it, and then I'm just gonna move it to our end destination, and then key z there. So now we can see that it's going in the destination. Alright. Now it also slows down at the end. I think that's alright. Okay, so now we have it. Just super simple. Just moves along its path. Now notice here that we have two different lines here. We have the translate Y, which is the first one that we keyed, and we have translate Z, which is the start to the end. And if we click on the top one, it's going to show all of the different keyframes that we have. So now let's add a wall. So I go to Polygon Primitives, I go to a cube, and press R to scale. I'm going to make it wide, I'm going to make it tall, I'm going to move it up so it's sitting on the grid, and put it right about over here. And now I'm going to scrub forward, and I'm going to notice where it hits the wall. And just because I like it at this spot, I'm going to move the wall over there. And I moved it over there. Now, the neat thing about this is that it's super easy to make it bounce off the wall. You don't have to think about physics or playing pool at all. All we have to do is know where we want it to change direction. So it's at 78. So Z is the thing that goes from one direction to the other direction. We're going to key Z right here, key, and then we're going to go to the end on the last keyframe, and we're going to move it to its end location. So I'm just eyeballing this. I'll put it right over there. And now when we go along, it's going to bounce, bounce, bounce. It's going to hit the wall, and it's going to go back. Now you'll notice that it just kind of goes up to the wall and just slowly changes position. However, that's not going to look realistic. And the reason for that, of course, is our tangents. So here we can change that to a linear tangent. So it goes over to the wall and immediately changes position. So now, if I scrub back and I press play, just like that. Check that out. Noisy, noisy dogs. All right. So now if we want to add a third element to it, which is rotation, this is also pretty easy. We can have the rotation start only when it gets to the first bounce. I'm going to save this, by the way. Just going to call it bouncing ball temp. So we start. We have to start with, and our rotation is going to be along the x-axis. And I can see that right down here in the bottom left over there. So rotate x, we're going to key that at our starting position. And then at 21, we're going to, let's see, should we key it? Yeah, at 21, we're also going to key it at 0 because this is where we want the movement to start. And then at, so 21, then at the end, we're going to key just a bunch of rotations. I put it up to about 230, and then I'm going to key that. So now if we go along here, oh, wrong direction. We want it to go the other way, so I'm going to put a minus on that and see what happens, and then key it. There we go. Now the other thing is that when it hits the wall, we want that rotation to go in the opposite direction. So again, we're going to go where it hits the wall, which is 78, and we're going to key rotate X. And then we're going to go to the end, and we were at 78, and that was minus 99. Let's change this to be 99 and key it and see how that looks. There we go. Pretty neat. It may look a little bit more realistic if we change the tangents of these guys to be linear. Let's see how that works. Yes. So there we go. So it ends a little abruptly, but it's all right. We could add more to it. So that's the rotation, bouncing, and all this stuff we've had Maya do the work for us. So we've had the only ones that we had to repeatedly do were the bounces, and then the distance and the direction was also really easily changed. Now the third thing that I want to go over is the ultimate tailed. So we'll go to File, and we'll go to Create Reference, and then we'll go to Ultimate Tailed, and so I created a reference for that. And here's our little tailed dude. So this is a good example of a very simple rig. So it's an articulated tail, and the way that the tail or articulation works is you click one of them and you can adjust it like so. If you click another one, it'll do that. You can see it's moving it from there. But if we click all of them, this one, this one, this one, and this one, and I'm holding down Shift in order to get the other ones along with that. That's how I add them. If I select all of those guys and then I select rotate, you'll notice that they all rotate together. So we have a nice little curve. Other examples of this on bodies are the back. There's usually about 4 control shapes, about that, that you can select if you want to really curve the body. A more obvious one is fingers, if you want to bend fingers, and tongue also. However, when I do lip syncing, I pretty much only animate one of them so that I don't actually really curve the tongue so much, because it happens so fast you're not really going to notice it. So let's get a bounce for this guy. And remember, we're only going to key the middle part. So we'll start it from the beginning, and like the other ones, we'll put 10 for this start, key that, and we go to move this in. We're going to go to 12, and then we'll put a 0 in there, and we'll key that. And then we go to 1, we copy, we go to 24, and we paste. So let's put 24 in here so that we can have it cycle. And again, it looks a little bit weird. So we go to our graph editor, we fix the bottom one, we make it linear. Looks better. Now, for the tail, so we want the tail it starts to we'll assume that it starts out straight. And so when it gets to the bottom, this is where it's going to be in full curved mode. So the air is the thing that's making it curve. So we're going to curve it just as it reaches the bottom. And all of these are selected. So when we key these rotational values, which is in rotate X, all of them will be keyed. So now if we go up here, oh, look, I didn't follow my own advice. Look at that. There's a good example. I didn't key the first one, so I need to put 0 in these guys, and now it's set. All right, so now when I go down here, it's going to curve. So now going up, we want it to just flick as it goes back up. Let's also go here and copy those keys so that when we go to 20, to the last one, 24 is the one at the top, then it'll go back straight. So going down, now we want it to go to the opposite. So it comes down here and it flicks because it immediately bounces, and we have all 3 of those selected. So we're going to flick it at just the opposite, and then we key selected. Now when it goes up to the top on 24, it's going to go back to being straight. So let's see what it looks like. Let's put this back to 24. Back to the beginning. There, look at that. Now you could add some other things to it. Oh, one thing that you could add to it that's fun is we can have it change aim going down. So if we want to aim it going down, again, we're going to just click on one of these guys. The rotation is X for that, so we want to make sure we key the beginning. And 12, we're going to aim it down, and then we're going to key that. And now going up, it's now going in the opposite direction, so we want to aim it up a little bit. And then we key that. So now, when it does this, there we go. Look at that. He's just bouncing through a field in his happy little cloud, as that artist would say. So there you are. I hope this isn't too long. It was about 45 minutes to do these 3 guys. And we learned about a bunch of stuff, keying with the graph editor, understanding the dynamics of bouncing and the physics that goes along with it, and making Maya work with you. Remember always to reference in your characters, and that's about it. I hope that this has been helpful. Thank you for watching.